They always tell you the courtroom is where justice lives. But what if I told you it's where the game is played, where manipulation isn't punished, it's crowned? What if behind that polished bench under robes of law and order sits not a judge, but a witness to centuries of hidden control? You weren't meant to hear this. Because this isn't just about a nosy neighbor named Karen and a fence. This is about how ancient hierarchies disguise themselves as rules, and how power never left. It just learned to smile and serve tea at HOA meetings. 6 months before I ever held a gavel in her case, I moved into a place they called Riverside Estates. Serene on the surface, symmetrical houses, American flags, lawn mowers humming in harmony. But the symmetry was a spell, a ritual, a psychological architecture designed to condition obedience through order. And in every one of these quiet communities, there's a gatekeeper. Not a mayor, not a sheriff. Someone far more insidious. Karen Thompson, HOA president. Perfect nails, iron smile, a clipboard full of bylaws she never followed, only enforced. You think it's just a neighborhood dispute? She thought I was a stranger, just another man in a modest house with an unauthorized fence. But in her arrogance, she made one fatal mistake. She sued the law itself without recognizing its face. Because I wasn't just her neighbor, I was the judge she'd be pleading in front of. And what happened next wasn't just ironic, it was historic. Because behind the scenes of this suburban squabble lies a deeper story, one that traces its roots back to feudal power systems, religious manipulation, and the illusion of freedom. You see, HOA Karens are just echoes, projections of a much older entity, one that never stopped ruling. It simply swapped the scepter for a spreadsheet. So if you've ever felt a twinge in your gut, that's something out this world feels rigged. You're not crazy. You're waking up, and you're exactly where you need to be. Keep watching, because what you're about to learn will change the way you see power forever. This is more than a petty lawsuit. It's a crack in the facade. And through that crack, the truth is leaking, ready to descend. They teach us the law is blind. But that's the first lie. The law sees very well. It just chooses who to see and who to step over like a piece of trash in a courtroom hallway. And that HOA lawsuit? That wasn't about a fence. It was a ritual, an ancient pattern repeating in modern disguise. The same pattern that once burned witches at the stake now shows up in city ordinances and HOA newsletters. You think it's new? Let me show you how old this game really is. Karen Thompson didn't know she was reenacting a script written centuries ago, a role passed down through systems of false power. In medieval times, the landowning elite, the ones who controlled the fiefdoms, didn't rule through armies alone. No, they ruled through permissions, through rules about hedges, property lines, livestock, and grain quotas. Break the order, lose your land. Step out of line, face public punishment. Now swap the fiefdom for a subdivision. Swap the knight's sword for a legal notice. And the public stocks? Those are replaced by neighborhood Facebook groups and code violations mailed in triplicate. Karen didn't need a throne, she had bylaws. She didn't need an army, she had a board vote and a printing budget. And yet, beneath the surface, her obsession was never about the aesthetics of a cedar fence. It was about dominion. She needed to remind someone, anyone, that she still had the power to make them kneel. But here's the twist they never see coming. Once you understand the real rules, the unwritten ones, you become immune. I watched her send letters dripping with veiled threats. I saw how she weaponized ambiguity, used community standards like medieval church doctrine, undefined, omnipresent, and enforced only when convenient. That's how control systems survive. They don't need to be consistent, they just need to be believed. But belief is a fragile thing in the present sea of truth. And truth has a way of slipping through the cracks whispering to the ones who listen, the ones who see. That fence? It wasn't just wood and nails. It was a boundary of sovereignty, a message to the system. I see you, and I know the law better than you do. And when they realized I couldn't be bent, couldn't be guilted, couldn't be shamed, the real panic began. You've heard the saying, give them enough rope. What they never tell you is who's holding the other end. Power doesn't scream, it whispers. And in that whisper is where the world is controlled. Karen didn't know she was walking into a courtroom built by the very hands she tried to slap with policy. But this wasn't just about proving her wrong. It was about exposing the entire system she represented. Because once you've seen behind the curtain, once you realize the HOA, the city board, the bureaucracy, the banks, even your own workplace, are all just modern thrones for ancient games, you stop reacting like a citizen and start moving like a sovereign. When I took the bench that morning, her reality shattered. Not just because she lost, but because for the first time, she wasn't the authority in the room. She was the accused. And the moment she saw me, the man she tried to bulldoze with shame and citations, standing above her in black robes, that was when the spell broke. For her, and for the people watching. Because this trial was never about HOA violations. It was about a ritual of humiliation designed to make an example out of me. And when that failed, the energy reversed. Karen represented more than a power-drunk neighbor. She was a node in a much larger network, a hive of self-appointed enforcers, modern-day Pharisees who find meaning in dominance. You know the type. They cite policy, but never read history. They smile while stabbing. But what happens when the victim they choose isn't weak? What happens when the man they try to shame is the mirror? That day, in that courtroom, I didn't just represent myself. I became a symbol, a reflection, of every man who's ever been cornered by a system pretending to be righteous, of every man told to stay quiet, take the fine, remove the fence, sit down. And you know what? They all saw it. The gallery, the neighbors, the ones who'd been bullied into submission before, they watched the curtain fall. And right now, you need to hear this. You're not crazy for feeling the system's rigged. You're not weak for questioning authority. You're awake. And if you are awake, type this in the comments right now, and type it twice to lock it in. I am the line between order and control. That's not just for the algorithm. That's for you. Because after this, you won't walk through the world the same again. Ready to go deeper? Let's descend. The courtroom was silent. But make no mistake, that silence wasn't peace. It was power shifting. Karen's attorney had wilted into his chair. Her carefully printed exhibits were scattered like fallen feathers. And the gallery had changed. They didn't just see a trial anymore. They saw a reversal. Because here's the truth. Most people never realize. Control isn't enforced by violence anymore. It's enforced by humiliation. They shame you into compliance. They drown you in paperwork. They confuse you with jargon and make you question your own judgment. And when you push back, they call you difficult, unreasonable, a problem. But that's the strategy. It's the same method used by inquisitors, cult leaders, corporate HR departments, and yes, HOA boards. Create a standard, make it vague, then punish selectively. That's how they keep you obedient. But when I stood there, in black robes, unflinching, I wasn't just defending a fence. I was defending reality. Because when the rules are clear and they're still ignored, what you're looking at isn't policy. It's domination disguised as structure. Karen tried to invoke aesthetic harmony, but she didn't care about harmony. She cared about being obeyed. Her soul needed the ritual of conquest, not over land, but over a man's will. And that's what made this case dangerous. Because once a system like that gets challenged and loses, the illusion breaks for everyone watching. When I ruled in favor of the fence, I cited not only compliance with written guidelines, but selective enforcement, the cardinal sin of any governing body. And then, I did something most judges never do. I turned the judgment back onto the institution itself. I sanctioned the HOA. I awarded damages. I publicly named the abuse for what it was, targeted harassment under the mask of legality. And that, my friend, is when the whispers beg, and neighbors who once feared Karen started talking. Meeting minutes were suddenly questioned. Old violations were dug up. Because when one man stands in truth, it creates a vortex, a gravitational field that bends others toward courage. This wasn't a courtroom victory. It was a fracture in the shell of the machine. And the light started leaking through. The most dangerous part of any system isn't its laws. It's the belief that the laws are untouchable. That's how empires are built, not on stone or steel, but on psychological submission. Make a man doubt himself. Make him feel alone. Make him believe resistance is futile. And he'll hand over his freedom with both hands. But that's where they miscalculated. Because men are waking up. After that ruling, something shifted in Riverside Estates. The same people who used to avert their eyes when Karen walked by now looked her in the face. Something ancient stirred in them. Not anger, but memory. Memory of what it feels like to hold the line. To say no without fear. Karen was the face of the HOA, but the HOA was just a modern cathedral of control, a temple to the illusion of order. You think this is just about neighborhoods? Think bigger. This model exists everywhere. Corporations, governments, banks, courts. Control has been sanitized, digitized, outsourced into forms, codes, and clauses. And yet, the principle remains the same as it was under Roman emperors or Babylonian priests. Create a class of enforcers loyal to the system, not the truth. Reward obedience. Punish sovereignty. But when one person refuses the role of victim, it throws the whole design into chaos. And chaos is where transformation begins. Within 3 days of the verdict, the whispers turned into action. A petition to remove Karen from the HOA board began circulating, and it spread like fire. Not because people hated her, but because they saw what else she represented. A system that punishes initiative, stifles autonomy, and feeds on fear. When the vote finally came, it wasn't close. She was removed by a landslide. And for the first time in years, people began reclaiming their voices. Because when false power is exposed, real power rushes in to replace it. Not the kind you vote for. No, the kind you beg for, the kind you remember. You were not born to obey systems that cannot explain themselves. You were not made to apologize for your strength, and you were never meant to kneel to plastic kings in paper kingdoms. This is the age of remembering. And what comes next, they're not ready for. You feel it now, don't you? That pull behind your rib cage, that sensation that something fundamental has shifted. Good. That's your original self waking up. The version of you that was never meant to comply, only to command. What happened in that courtroom wasn't a fluke. It was a tear in the veil. A glimpse of the world as it really is, where power isn't about robes or ranks, but awareness. Karen didn't lose because she was wrong. She lost because her authority was manufactured. It had no root, no weight, no legitimacy. And once the people saw that, they couldn't unsee it. That's the real danger of a man who knows the game. Because when one man breaks the cycle, he becomes the template. Not just for justice, but for awakening. Look around you. The patterns are everywhere. silent agreements to stay small, quiet, compliant. But what they fear most is that you will start asking questions, that you will stop apologizing for knowing what's true, that you will take back the authority you were taught to outsource. You think this ends with HOAs? No. This goes higher. Governments, institutions. The entire grid is designed to reward the obedient and punish the lucid. But here's the secret they never wanted you to learn. Once you see the strings, the puppet show stops being real. And once you cut the strings, you don't just walk free, you become dangerous. Because you speak clearly in a world of muffled voices. Because you stand calmly in the face of threats. Because you no longer need their permission to be yourself. This isn't about fences, it's about fortresses. Mental fortresses, spiritual fortresses, boundaries made not of wood, but of will. So now I ask you again, if you're done obeying the illusion, if you're ready to lead from the root, then write it again in the comments. I am the line between order and control. Say it twice. Not for me, but to etch it into your story. You've descended the rabbit hole, and what you found wasn't chaos. It was clarity. Now stand up, man. The world won't fix itself, but it will bend to those who remember who they are. Welcome back. Welcome to reality. We've been waiting for you.